Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sofa series Artist Spotlight. Today, with me from her home in Atlanta, Georgia, is Soprano Malesha Jessie Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So, give us a little bit of just the bullet points, the basic rundown of your life. Where have you lived? Where'd you go to school? Who's your best friend? Your favorite
I can do that. I'm from Claremont, California. If you know where the Claremont colleges are,
Hmm.
yeah, and outside of LA County. So I went to high school there. It was a great high school for the arts. I was a thespian there. Did a lot of choir tours. I was fortunate to go to a public school that had great arts exposure. From there, I went to Cal State Fullerton for undergrad and voice. And from there, I went to USC for undergrad, for grad school in voice. And from USC, I did some comprimario with Los Angeles Opera and San Francisco Opera. I did not do a young artist program. Somehow I skipped that part. Uh, it just happened. And after doing some really great opera contracts, I moved to Budapest, Hungary, and pursued like European singing life for a
Hmm.
minute. And made friends with a lot of musicians and local orchestras. I did some recitals there, and then kind of got really wild. I started singing with the fun band there, like a world music jazz band,
Awesome.
and doing whatever I wanted, essentially.
Yeah.
I did work with some gypsy musicians at like a local salon, and we did like a mixture of opera and jazz and Broadway music together.
Awesome.
And Budapest was just a really open, easy place to live for artists.
Right.
So I really thrived there. After Budapest, I came back to do Porgy and Bess with the San Francisco Opera, and that production is on PBS. So if
Hmm.
you look it up or see the PBS version, I am in that version. And I played the role of Annie. And after Porgy and Bess with San Francisco Opera, I went into teaching. So I've taught at Scripps College and Claremont Colleges. I've taught at Cal State San Marcos, and I currently teach at Clark Atlanta University.
That's great. All right. So that is like quite the whirlwind.
It is
A full life.
the
A
full life.
full life, man. All right. So now you're in Atlanta, but a while back, while you were here in San Diego, you did this really really beautiful TED talk where you talked about identity and accessibility in classical musics and being typecast and the sort of the problematic relationship that classical music tradition has with race and otherism. It's like a whole big like can of worms. We can go on and on about exoticism and that sort of bullshit.
Yes.
But with you specifically, you were talking about like who's included and excluded in your own sort of experience with opera. And I'm wondering, like, I don't know, in your own work now, do you find that these institutions are changing a little bit, or do you still feel that it's very much business as usual?
Wow. That
Sorry, straight out the gate.
that is a good question. Well, so what? Yes. So my TED talk was about identity, and what I had to come to, which I hope everyone gathered by the end of the talk, is to focus on being myself instead of reacting to institutions and reacting to folks outside of me that are dictating so-called the career for me. I had to just make my way and do what I like. And I do a lot of stuff. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I love experimental improv. For those who know me in that world, they might freak out to see me singing traditional opera at all. Like they'd be like, how is the two at all together? traditional opera, people will not understand me singing gospel music,
Mm-hmm.
right, in a Black church setting. They won't see how I can even cross and sing in Italian and then sing gospel. Um, and that just happens in my life, right? And I just grew to accept that I like all this music. And I grew up in a very open minded family. I grew up without feeling like if I didn't like something, I couldn't pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, institutions now, what I do now is I present things that I think are a good match for that institution.
Right.
So, for example, with San Diego Opera, I did end up doing more community engagement work than I did singing in their traditional opera season.
Mm-hmm.
So, I did get to take Richard's music that I talked about in my talk
Mm-hmm.
to some young people in City Heights and have a conversation with them about classical music representation, and give them an opportunity to meet a local Black composer
Yeah.
currently living,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't usually meet composers, number one, and then that are alive.
Yeah.
And we don't often meet Black composers who write about Black experiences. So in that sense, the institution did find some way to incorporate my gifts. And so I encourage all artists to find the things that you're most passionate about and present them. You don't know sometimes that singing in the chorus doesn't mean that you can't do a couple of outreach gigs,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or vice versa, that you could be in outreach and then you can actually do outreach at one company and with another company be on main stage.
Right. Right.
You know?
I feel like that, like the sort of the lanes, like the traditional opera career, it had, I don't know, the way that you kind of pursue the career with a capital C is just not the same way as it was 20 years ago. And so much onus is on the artist to wear all of the hats, right? To be their own publicist, to be their own, everything. And but I also think that more and more like modern singers are discovering that that if they fill the resumes with also musical theater and also contemporary music, and finding this like relationship with composers can actually be quite rewarding. It's not always just like squeaky fence music in the academic institutions. It's very
Yeah.
much alive. It's reflective of what is happening now, and it should be. You know.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you find that working relationship with composers? Let's start with Richard.
Yes. So I had one before Richard, which helped me. The first composer I actually worked with in my life was female composer named Jenny Brandon. She's
Oh,
still actually in Long Beach, California.
okay.
She's still writing. She was a colleague of mine, and we were both at USC. And she always complained about representation for women composers. And I felt similar at being a person of color and a woman. And so we put together a couple of recitals of her music.
Mm-hmm.
And that was outside of school. That was the weird window when you graduate and you're not really sure what to do, but you want to keep fresh and keep practicing. So I worked with Jenny first. And after Jenny, when I lived in New York City, I worked with another woman composer named Ellen Mandel. Her and I did probably 12 of her songs. We made an album in New York. We made a cabaret show where she was like my co host.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did all of that with her. She's still a great friend of mine. And then Richard, when I ended up moving from New York to San Diego, Richard was the third composer I've worked with. And Richard, I heard about just in the network, and I reached out to him directly and just asked him about his music. He's really awesome because he uses poetry of Langston Hughes, um, which has become like it's a really popular set of poetry that he uses. So I reached out to Richard to work with him, and I drove to San Diego State went to his office and we rehearsed for at least a year some of
Mm.
his music.
How do you find, like, is it, I guess, is it different from composer to composer? Do you find that you have any input in how your own instrument can approach a certain line, or do you kind of say, "Oh, you write the stuff, I'll sing the stuff"?
Yeah, usually, so the composers, yes, Jenny wrote some stuff for me
Mm-hmm.
with my voice and my tessitura in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and she wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
With Ellen, she had music already written that I adored, and we just sang it as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Richard transposes for me, so a lot of his music he'll change the key. He will change it to whatever you want, and yes, they did all rehearse very differently. There's a lot of like um, navigating of personality and ego, right? Because the composer is physically present watching you either sing well or sing badly their
Right.
music, right? So,
Right.
so like wrong notes are an insult to them personally, right? It's like an attack. And so, what I would usually do is just let them play it, and then I'd go home and rehearse it really, really well, and then come back.
Yeah.
They wouldn't feel and
But it's like such a fraught relationship too, though. It's like, so the two of you are in there. You the interpreter want to do right by them. It's not it's not like you're in there
yeah,
trying to like just like mess it all up and do any of that on purpose. But and so like the nerves and it's yeah, every composer is different. And if you know them well enough, then those nerves of course subside. But even when I'm working with some of my best closest friends, I feel duty bound to be correct, you know? And
yeah,
if it's incorrect, it's like, oh my God, so shameful. You're never going to write for me ever again. This is awful, you know? It's just
right,
like shame spiral. And then, which of course
yeah,
is also not the case. They'll always want to work with you again, you know?
right. Yeah, there's a lot of that, like feeling rejected by a composer is
Mm-hmm.
like a nightmare. And then, but they also do have that too. They are excited that you're exposing. Like when I worked with Richard, it was almost like I was also a producer because I
Mm-hmm.
was putting our audience together and I was selling our music to people, to institutions, and getting folks to book us.
Well, let's talk
So
about that because you put a classical concert, a classical recital at a jazz club. Right?
that's
So
right.
that was really smart. That was
Yeah,
a good move, Malesha.
yeah. And the trip is, it's known as a jazz club, but when you go there, it's the Union Music Hall, right?
Mm,
So the acoustics are perfect. There's lighting. It's made for any music.
yeah, they've got a good
Uh,
piano in there already. You don't have to bring one.
they had their own built-in audience, and Richard had an audience there, being also like a hybrid jazz composer.
Hmm.
And then I brought in a fresher audience on top of that, so we did really well on that
Hmm.
collaboration at Disney. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you guys collaborate again?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we talk about it a lot. He wrote an opera, I think, on Sarah Vaughan or something, or like
God,
a song cycle. Yeah. Yes, I
that
gotta check.
has to happen.
Yeah.
You know, let's talk. You want to book it?
I know, right? Yeah, he's awesome to work with. And we
Yeah.
did another concert at San Diego Downtown Library,
Hmm.
the Downtown Library concert series.
Hmm.
I think 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about one other incredible, wonderful composer. Her
Yeah.
name is Yvette Jackson. And she is currently now, no big deal, a professor at Harvard. No big deal. So let's talk a little bit about your opera project with her, which was the first, actually, it was the first piece that I had seen of hers done live. I'd heard some of her radio operas before that, but seeing it live, and it was down at what, Space for Art, and that like outdoor amphitheater that was so shitty for live performance, but it was so good. So let's talk a little bit about that opera. What's it called? What's it about? And how did you guys come to work together?
Oh my God, that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was, yes, a Space for Art. It was outdoors. Yvette. did an amazing job on the sound for
Mm-hmm.
that. It was multimedia, so there was film projected behind us. Um, Kamal Kenyatta, who has a Grammy and is
Mm-hmm.
also at UCSD, was
No big deal. No big deal.
no big deal. Award-winning producer, producer, composer. He was saxophone in that. We
Yeah.
had an actor playing a black preacher, and the whole premise, the title is Invisible People, and it talked about homophobia and the black community,
Mm-hmm.
and it made it really, really vivid because I recall that Yvette had the audience kind of get up and mimic an altar call in a church service. I don't know if you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Were you
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
the first time I met you, and I was like, "Oh my god, you're amazing! Hi, can I be friends with you?" And you were like, "Pump the
Right.
brakes."
And what I loved about that experience with Yvette was whenever I work with Yvette, she's all about improv with me.
Right.
She's
That's
the only person who knows how to let me just improvise.
yeah. Had you done much of that before? Or I guess in within the classical context or idioms, never, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no.
And how was it to kind of to put on that other right? So you kind of I don't know. I think for me, like when you're starting out, you sort of you divide your interests up, never thinking that they could ever intertwine, right? You know, so.
Yes,
But of course, they intertwine these interests in music. Gospel is not separate from musical theater. Is not separate from classical music. Is not separate from jazz. They all inform each other, and they
right.
all sort of like do coexist historically. So how is it kind of being able to tap into maybe something that was in this other identity of yours and maybe bring them together?
Yes, that is what happened. I got to tap into, um, yes, like what it means to improvise in jazz and in Black church music,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I embodied, I think, the text from Angela Davis in her piece. And so I got that liberty and that freedom to go there and to know that Yvette was all about amplifying that voice in me. That,
Mm-hmm.
that was the point and that was the goal. And it was also really fun to just feel free and to feel trusted,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Yvette trusted that what I was going to do was going to be great.
That's nice.
Right.
Right?
Like do anything that comes to you right now is going to be real, it's going to be authentic, and it's going to be great for those reasons,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
That's good.
It's a true gift to work with you guys, serious. Yeah, and we're talking about, we're scheming for some more future projects, so
Oh, good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she is amazing. She definitely has. I don't know for like her use of technology and electronic sounds for me always feels and sounds right. It sounds the most organic and correct thing for the message that she's trying to get across. Is oftentimes
Yeah.
in electronic music it can feel like okay, well there's the artifice of the electronics, and let's like we're gonna pay attention to the electronics, and everything else is just decoration.
Right, right.
It is very much it cohabitates the same space in a very beautiful way. I love about her music. She's so good. She's so good.
Absolutely.
And so then you did get into a little bit more of your own improvisation and starting using your own kind of looping pedals and doing these types of projects involving dancers as well, right?
Yes, yes. So that was at Cal State San Marcos, and that was also a complete experiment. Like, for, let me think if I had worked with dance. Well, I did. I have studied modern dance, and I have just an open mind about it.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell you. And I'm just an open person. I just want to try stuff.
Yeah, what don't you do? Do you do fencing too? Do you
No,
like
I,
judo? You have a
But
black belt in karate or something.
but no, I had a really great connection with the experimental dance department at Cal State San Marcos with Anya Cloud, and we just talked, and she was like, "We are doing this really intense piece by a queer Black artist named Jamil Osoku," and so she brought me to a rehearsal and said, "I don't know, think about something. What do you feel?" And I had to think about it, and I was like, I want to buy a loop pedal. Like, I've seen these people do this with like other instruments. I bet I could sing
Yeah.
and loop. So I went and invested in a loop system. It's just like a RC30 cost loop system. But I did all this cool stuff with it. I did like distorted sounds. I did percussion and beats. I sang any kind of noise I wanted. I made up poetry that I was feeling in the moment, and the dancers responded to me in real time.
That's great.
So every rehearsal was an experiment, and then on stage, the same thing happened. We didn't really plan exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, no
We,
structure?
we had a time boundary. We
Okay.
had an arc,
Yeah.
and that was it. Like I knew that we would get to the middle, and I knew there'd be an end, but it was mostly intuitive.
Wow. That
Yeah.
freaked me out. Like even at my improv, I need a little structure.
And the structure that I got was knowing the students and hanging out with them. So I did spend intimate time with them in conversation. We
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of circle gatherings, and we got to talk with the artist in residence, Jamil,
Mm-hmm.
on video. He chimed in. He was at Princeton at the time. Um, so we did a lot of like groundwork and emotional connecting, and that's where it got to a point where it was just autopilot, like it was just intuitive.
Yeah, yeah. Do
Mm-hmm.
you find that like exploring sort of free improvisation informs your approach to other musics as well? Like, does it kind of maybe change the way you perceive sound or think about sound?
Yes, it does. Um, Improv teaches me to use my whole voice and to appreciate all parts of it.
Hmm. Even
Like my,
even the ugly.
even the ugly, like,
Yeah.
oh, I have a weird registration brain. I'm going to yodel through it and just make it, I'm going to make this an emotional statement, right? Like I'm going to push into that, right? Or I'm going to use my chest voice instead of acting like it's some scary demon, right?
Poor Sopranos.
Right, can't use chest, and
Forbidden.
whispers and clicks and tongue trills and all of that fun stuff that we do in warm ups. Like
Hmm.
you can use that now. Like it's an
Yeah.
actual place. It has an appropriate place
Yeah.
in performance and improv. So
Why not? Just
make noise.
use it. You've got a lot of voice. Use it all. There's too much in there, you know. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your guerrilla opera projects that you did. This was in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
back in the city.
Yeah.
So how did that come about, and what was the? So explain a little bit about what was the concept, and how did you come to this project?
Yes. It reminds me of where we are right now, actually, because I was thinking about kind of doing something like that again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Basically, what happened is I realized that I had all these neighbors that wanted to hear me sing, but I had no venue.
Mm-hmm.
Because in New York, if you're either going to pay money to book a place, which is not happening,
Not gonna happen. It sucks.
or you're in like a huge audition cattle call,
Mm-hmm.
which is it may not ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're in a chorus at a church gig, which is not really a platform for all of your creative expression. So it's hard to find your way as a singer in New York unless you know some spaces that are going to let you sing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of was like, I need to come up with something cool to do, but I really want to sing in my community.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody was like, you know what, you should just roll up to some weird bodega corner store and just belt out singing, and we should make a comedy sketch out of it. And you should just be like the weird, like opera girl who shows up out of nowhere in a bunch of places.
And assaults everybody with her high notes. Yeah.
And everyone's like, what is that? Who is that? And the guy had this idea as more of like a comedic video series.
Uh-huh.
And somehow I was like, you know what? Why don't I, like, I don't want to make opera into a joke. And I don't want to make it all about like, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be legit and meaningful. And I want to show that this is also my neighborhood. Like opera singers live in the hood, right? And we can walk around the corner and sing to a barbershop. And who's to say that the guy in the barbershop won't appreciate it?
Right.
Like, who's to say that he'll laugh and tell me to leave?
Right.
So I ended up getting that same guy to do that for me for free and being like, great, cool. Took the footage. He could care less about it. He's like a big time filmmaker now, actually. He's on like some Netflix movies now.
Oh, no big deal.
Super big deal guy. But all that footage ended up being wanted by Brick, which is an arts organization based in Brooklyn. And they ended up interviewing me and blowing this up into a big thing, putting me in a museum exhibition called Cultural Fluency. And it became a thing. It became a legitimate piece of artwork, but it was most appreciated by the visual arts community.
Yeah, they're open to
Like,
all sorts of experiments in like where do these things belong? And that is like the question, right? Like where does opera belong? Does it belong in your body? Does it belong in your neighborhood? Does it belong exclusively? Is it a rich white lady club where you just go to see and be seen? And who gives a shit about the opera at all? You know, so it's like there's so many questions that are being presented. Did you find that people were receptive to it, or were they just like, could you not, you know?
No, they loved it. Everyone loved that. I sang in a laundromat, and I didn't capture that one. But this guy just stood there and was like, "Thank you so much." Like people gave me these sincere thank yous, like I gave them money or
Mm-hmm.
gave them a gift. And sometimes it was like I gave them access, like I gave them access to something that they would not normally have freely given to them.
Right. Right.
Uh, and all of that became a part of why it was like an artistic uh, thing for a museum because it was crossing the issues of, like you said, place and venue and culture and literacy of culture and access and politics
Mm-hmm.
and race, and all of that was involved in that project. So I did duplicate it again with the Museum of Man. They
Right.
loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were San Diego audiences similarly receptive, or did you find it a little different? Yeah.
They were not. They were not as receptive. And I think just New Yorkers are super vocal,
Right.
right? They're like all up in the camera. You know, they create entertainment just by their presence.
Mm-hmm.
And San Diegans kind of were just like cool, like they thought they were supposed to give me $2 in a jar, you know. So it was just a different experience, different vibe. Um, but
Well, I think that has like I don't know if I'm gonna like go off on a tangent about personal space and boundaries because like in New York City there is none. You know, you are up, you're like on stacked on top of each other in each other's business like all day every day. That you are surrounded by people. And in California, we have the protection of suburban sprawl. This swooping expanse where everybody gets their own personal space, and don't you dare step on my lawn. And it's very like very guarded, even in public interactions. I find
yeah,
that like just making eye contact with somebody, a stranger on the street, is like threatening. You
right,
know. Um,
right.
and so you were invading their personal space via their ears. That's maybe assumption. You know.
That's very true. It is about private space. You do have the luxury of space in
Mhm.
Southern California.
Mhm.
That is huge.
It's
Mm-hmm.
huge, and it's a problem for in many other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but also like even in Southern California, it's like as somebody who has an arts organization, it's hard to I think find to to really nurture an audience because convincing people to get in their cars and drive more than maybe like 15 minutes is like a big ask, you know. And
Yeah.
so, like, God forbid the La Jollans come to a concert in Barrio Logan. It's like, pearl clutching. I
Right.
might as well have like just offered to murder their mothers. You know, it's difficult to build this kind of community. And you had talked a little bit about in your in one of the your think pieces that you wrote was that an audience should reflect the community, like regardless of what even is being presented. Like it really doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be jazz, it could be musical theater, it could be rock, it could be performance art, it could be like the most abstract thing. But if it doesn't like communicate with who's around you at that time, then why do it? You know?
Yes.
Yeah,
Huge.
yeah.
Huge. Yeah. We've been talking a lot about, especially right now, organizations that I don't usually like to use the word audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, because I did an audience development job
Mm-hmm.
at that time. And what I quickly learned is audience development should actually be a result of community engagement.
Right.
Like the audience is a result of community. An audience is made of your community. Um, and that goes into another issue of like for profit and nonprofit
Mm-hmm.
ideas of what the arts is. Like, is the arts a for profit entertainment organization, entertainment company?
Or is it like responding and communicating with what is relevant at this very moment?
Right.
Right.
I mean, if you're a nonprofit 501c3 organization,
Mm-hmm.
you are obligated to a board
Right.
of the community
Right.
first.
Right.
And that's the part that I think is difficult, especially with very niche arts. It's like, you know, certain arts do not really reach community. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah, it's. I mean, its very existence is already removed from, you know,
right.
a localized place. It's sort of up on the hill in La Jolla and inaccessible.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of like making me think. I've been thinking a lot about why even why even make art, why even make music,
Right.
what even is the point anymore when the world is literally on fire, when people are still being murdered by police, when there's this virus, this invisible existential threat that is affecting everyone. It just like it's all like we were starting to talk earlier, like it's all too much.
Yeah.
So are you, I'm sure you're considering these things, but how are you how are you negotiating these things, and like where are you coming, yeah, how are you approaching your own practice right now?
Whoa. Yeah. I am approaching my practice first from an inward space. I think art making is an internal expression. So something that is within us that comes out. And we cannot stop it from happening. Artists cannot stop expressing. It is what we do. We express beautiful things. And the issue becomes, will it monetize and pay me a lifestyle? Is more of the concern.
Mm-hmm.
Because we always have people to give art to.
Right.
You are in proximity with any other human, you can give them an expression, right? Um, and it's weird. So I did this video. I don't know if you saw this intense video I did on Facebook. Um, but I sang for Martin Luther King's church yesterday, no, Sunday. And it was timed. at a very intense time. When I recorded that video, it was 3 weeks ago. And to me, I'm singing into my phone, no compensation. I'm just doing it for the goodness of humanity, for of my heart, of my relationship with God. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just doing this act of music.
Mm-hmm.
And the response I got was overwhelming. Um, and I was not expecting it. And it just showed me that sitting in the house and not giving music to people is not helpful. And I can't always expect to have it monetized
Right.
and then say, unless I'm getting paid, I'm not an artist.
Right.
And if I'm not an artist, then I'm not going to make art. It's like, it's like, because that's not how it is. It's really, I create art. Oh, but I happen to get compensated. Oh, and I happen to make someone cry. Like, those are all results of art that it's just going to come out. There's nothing I can do to stop it. My kids are going to hear me sing.
Whether they like it or not.
I sing in my house all the time. I sing in meetings. I
Yep.
sing in the middle of teaching.
Yeah.
No matter where I go, singing just comes out of my mouth. And when it's organized and perfect and with a paycheck, that's great. But that's not all art is meant to be.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful place to. It's like the period at the end of the sentence. Thank you so much, Malesha, for taking the time to chat with me about your practice, about your world and life, and your amazing, amazing output. You're just a wonderful, divine soul, and like I've been stalking you on the internet for like years. Like she's really cool.
Thank you. That is so cool. Thank you. Because sometimes I just do stuff and I don't even realize. Does anyone care about that? I don't know. You
That's
know?
not, yeah, that's not up to you to worry about.
Right.
Like it's out there. It's
Yeah.
done. Let it go. Let it live, you know.
Right. That's right. That's so
All right. Well,
good.
thank you again. I really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Leslie.
My
Thank you for
pleasure.
this platform and for creating this for us. We
My
appreciate
pleasure. My pleasure.
it.
All right.